Atlanta History Center. And Miss Sally Bishop Gusa is going to tell us about her memories of Pearl Harbor before and after. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking me. I'm thrilled to be here. Those were important times to me. I was 12 when Pearl Harbor was born. Was fired on. And I was not aware that anything was wrong in the world. We just played and had a good time. I was actually in 7th grade at that time. I grew up in Marietta, and so I think the population was about 8,000 when the war started. And Pearl Harbor, the first thing I knew, my family always went for a Sunday ride in the car. My mother and daddy and my brother and me and my grandmother. And we must not have had radio on during the day, because it was not until we started out on our ride and Daddy stopped at the gas station for gas. And in those days, the person at the gas station came out and filled the gas and washed your windshield and checked your tires. And I heard Mr. Shipp say to Dad, "That's an awful thing in Hawaii, isn't it?" And so when Dad got back in the car, of course, I asked him, and Mother had already started telling us about it. The next day at school really stands out in my mind, because I was in 7th grade, and that they had a radio broadcast, I would say about 11 o'clock, when they brought in at least the other 7th grade. We only had 2, and I think that was probably all, but we all listened in this particular room. And I can remember having to sit up on top of the desk, so while 2 people sat in the bottom, where the old-fashioned seat desk. And that was the day that President Roosevelt gave his Day of Infamy speech. And that was real touching. It's something that I'll remember forever and ever. Also, almost immediately, young men started volunteering for the Army or other services. And it was real poignant to me when they left with a little suitcase, a little satchel, some of them just with a sack of clothes, to go to Fort Mac or wherever the induction center was. And the bus left from in front of Hodges Drugstore, which was one of about 3 drugstores on the square in Marietta. And it was one of the places where we hung out. So the bus left. Many people made a point of being down there to see these guys off, not just their families, but other townspeople. Also, in Marietta, we had streetcars, a streetcar that ran back and forth from Marietta to Atlanta. And this was just taken for granted. It would come into Marietta and stop in front of the courthouse, and people would get on there, would go around the square, and then back out Atlanta Street, down can't even remember what they called it. It was the old Atlanta Highway, down through Fair Oaks and Smyrna and to Bolton, and then come into Atlanta to the Walton Street station. So that was the only mass transportation to Atlanta, but it worked well. I think it was a dime to go to Atlanta. We rode it to the Southeastern Fair. When my grandmother took my cousin and me to the Southeastern Fair, we'd go spend the day and ride the streetcar down to the Walton Street station, and then change and go out to Lakewood. But besides the boys leaving then, in high school, which was the next year, we had a favorite English teacher, Mr. Callison. His wife had been our teacher in junior high, which was the 6th and 7th grades. And our high school was only comprised of 8, 9, 10, and 11. We did not have a 12th grade. But I think we got an education that exceeds anything we've got today. But Mr. Callison was our English teacher, and we just adored him, but we also adored his wife. We dedicated our yearbook in '46 to her. And he got called up, or he volunteered, and we all went down to the train station. By then they were leaving on the train, went down to the train station to see him off. Another thing that way trains entered in was that there were troop trains during the war. And I worked at the swimming pool. My daddy was the director of recreation, and I started real young selling tickets to the pool and to ball games. But I'd have to walk home and come up Polk Street where there was a railroad crossing. And during those war years, there were often many times that troop trains would be stopped for, I don't know for what purpose, but they were there a pretty lengthy time. And the boys would just hang out the windows. Now, I'm getting older in these, I'm up to 15 and 16 then, And they would just hang out the windows and call us over, and I didn't hesitate to go over. I wasn't afraid to go talk to them. They were on that train, and they were serving our country. They were brave guys, and we'd exchange addresses, and I had several pen pals that I wrote through that. Also, I'm not aware of people bringing things to the train, and maybe they did, people who lived by the tracks. But the main street, Highway 41, was Church Street in Marietta, and that was a block from my house. And they would have, not troop trains, it was like a cavalcade of them. And they would stop. They would get to the square for some reason. It would back up, way out. And then the ladies would either bring what they had, if they had cakes made, or they would hurry and bake some things because they knew others would be coming. Maybe they just kept them on hand. But the ladies were so good about taking things out to those boys there. When rationing began, first of all, let me see, I lived in a great big house with my grandmother who ran a grocery store in the house. It took up about half of our downstairs. And it was not big by any means like what we have today, but it was just like one aisle and cans stacked on each side, but there was a wonderful candy counter that I could just go help myself through all my life, silver bells and stuff like that. But when the war began, rationing started, and we didn't feel it, I think, as badly as others because we had chickens and cows here in Marietta, a block off Church Street. We had chickens and cows and pigs, and chicken, cows, and pigs, and we'd have hog killing, so we always had meat, which a lot of people didn't have. We had milk from the cow, so we had cream and butter, which a lot of people didn't have. Chicken, we ate a lot of fried chicken. Beef was scarce. We didn't get a lot of steaks or beef roast. We did, prior to the war, have beef roast, but during the war we didn't have beef roast. When rationing began, the things that I can remember being rationed, and I hope I'm remembering correctly, I know that gasoline was rationed. We had books, and unless you were a doctor or you worked for something that was really pertinent to the war effort, for some other reason that they deemed necessary, you had an A ration book. And this is what we had. There was a sticker that went on the windshield, and you only got a little bit of gas. I don't know how much. But these were high school years for me, and the rationing did hurt in that we could not drive to out-of-town ball games. We played teams, basketball and football. We played teams like Canton and Cartersville and teams just north of town, but we also played several of the schools in Atlanta, Decatur, Druid Hills, Fulton, North Fulton, West Fulton. And you got to get a football team there, that's A and B, junior varsity and regular varsity, and then you got to get the people who want to go there to see the kids play. Us kids who wanted to go.
You were on one of those teams.
Later on, I was on the girls' basketball team, and then I was a cheerleader in my senior year, and so they had to get us down there too. And so we had to use the coupons. Everybody would pool the gas coupons to go to Canton and those places. I was not on a bus going there. We always went in private cars. But for the Atlanta ones, we used the good old streetcar. We'd go down and change, just like we did when I had said earlier, at the Walton Street Station and go to wherever we were playing, whichever the Atlanta teams. And that was just great, great fun. Of course, there were other people on there too. There were adults. And smoking was terrible. I mean, there was so much smoke. It's not the kids smoking, because we didn't smoke then, but there was so much smoke you just thought you were going to choke to death. And I think one reason I started smoking in high school was self-protection on the streetcar. That's an awful thing to say. I was never a heavy smoker, thank goodness for that. But other things that were rationed was food. In the grocery store, I had to help my grandmother put up how many points were required for different types of food that were on the counter. I don't have any memory of what the point values were for different things. I just remember having to put up the signs saying how many points it took to buy those. Shoes were rationed because leather was hard to get. And in the summer, we wore sandals. Of course, I guess our good shoes for the winter were saved from year to year if your feet didn't grow too much, but I did have big feet. And in the summer, we walked everywhere in those days, even before the war. Gas had nothing to do with that, so I was working at the swimming pool in the ballpark, which was, I guess, 6 or 8 blocks from my house. And then walking to work over there, or just to go swimming or whatever, if a rain came, we'd just take our shoes off because you had to save those shoes and walk barefoot. It was sort of fun. You could walk by the curb and the rivulets are running down and it felt pretty good. But you need to save the soles. I swear, I think they were cardboard. I may be all wet, but I didn't mean that. That's a real pun. Let's see. I don't know the exact time that it was announced that Bell Bomber Plant was coming to Marietta. I know that Rip Blair was mayor of Marietta, and George McMillan, I believe, was the county commissioner. And they, along with others, were instrumental in getting Bell Bomber to Marietta. The 4-lane highway, which is now Highway 41, was not built at that time. I'm not even sure if it was a 2-lane road. Maybe it was, but I didn't drive then. I don't know if it was or not. But that was primarily widened and made into a 4-lane to get people into the Bell Bomber Plant. And as a young teenager, I had a friend who lived down on East Dixie Avenue, which was down in that direction. And they had graders out there grading the land, and they went around the clock, 24 hours around the clock. And many nights, and spend the night in parties. Girls don't always go to sleep real quickly. And we'd go out and sit on her steps and just watch those big, didn't take much to entertain us, to watch those big old machines grade under lights all night long. You could hear them and they just kept going.
I was told during the war that Bell Bomber Plant was.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Round the clock shifts.
Oh, absolutely. My aunt worked there, and I had 2 brothers who were younger than me, so we didn't have to worry about them being drafted or anything. And my dad was past the age of it, and he was too old to even volunteer. He'd always been in the National Guard up until, I guess, the late 30s. When Bell Bomber was announced that it was coming, I think, as I said, we had about 8,000 people in Marietta. And then I believe the population grew so that by the time I graduated from high school in '46, it was up to about 30,000. Now, I know that you can't imagine Marietta. It was just mainly the square and about 5 or 6 blocks in each direction off of it. In school, kids would ride the streetcar to school from further out. Some of them we went to school with all through the years, but others, I guess for their high school, came in from the consolidated schools. And the ones that were north, of course, did not have the streetcar to ride. I don't know how they got in, because I don't think we had bus services to our school even then. But Bell Bomber was big news, and of course it was just the bomber plant to us, the bomber plant. All of us had grown up in Marietta. We all spoke the Southern language, and then when it came time to go to high school, we weren't expecting it because we knew everybody, and we just, oh yeah, it's going to be just like it's always been. Well, I went into my first class. I wanted to take typing, and I went into the first class. All the desks were taken, sometimes with 2 in the desk, and people were standing around the walls, and we didn't know a lot of them. Well, they had come with the bomber plant. Some of them came from other towns in Georgia and other states in the South, but a lot were these people who talked funny. They were Yankees, and they even looked different. I think we didn't have many of other nationalities. I think a lot of them were from nationalities that were darker complected than we are. But there were a lot of really cute, nice people, and we had a lot of new friends, which really added to our high school years. As I started saying, my aunt did work at Bell Bomber it was then. And I can remember women didn't wear pants, but when the bomber plant came, they had to wear pants to work, and they wore nets or snoods on their hair to contain their hair. And snoods was something you thought about sort of from Gone with the Wind days, because they wore snoods back then, and people probably don't know what I'm talking about.
I never saw a man that didn't hate snoods, but it keeps you from being scalped if you're working around those airplanes.
Absolutely. I wish I could remember. We had a friend whose father worked was a higher up person at Bell Bomber, one of these Yankees that came in. He had 2 daughters our age, and they lived on the location now where Dobbins Air Force Base is. I think Dobbins came in maybe toward the end of the war. But some of my memories of the changes and rationing and all the influx, there was a whiskey store, the Stonewall whiskey store, liquor store, was about 2 doors down from the courthouse. And on payday, there would be a line from the liquor store, past the cafe, past the courthouse, and then down Washington Avenue, of the people who had just gotten paid and they wanted their booze. Also,
surprised at the business.
oh, no, these people had, I was not surprised. Bootleg was still popular, but the bootleggers couldn't keep them supplied, I don't think. And these new people didn't know the bootleggers.
Right.
I don't know if they didn't have friends yet who could tell them about them, and maybe they were cracking down on maybe the bootleggers were working at the bomber plant and we just didn't know it.
maybe the bootleggers got drafted.
Yeah, well, that could well be, the younger ones anyway. Let's see, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Your aunt worked at the bomber plant.
Yes, my aunt worked at the bomber plant, and she had 2 children, so all of us lived in the same house. It was a zoo, and we never had babysitters, but because my grandmother was always home, and for a number of years my great-grandmother was there. And the store was always busy, so my mother worked downtown. She was a bookkeeper. But despite the war, we had a lot of fun at home. We had a teenage canteen, which my father was instrumental as recreation director in starting. You heard about the Hollywood canteen and the canteens they had for the boys. Well, they got the kids together, and to help decide what we wanted to do. It was in the upstairs of the city hall, and I think it had maybe once been a Masonic hall or something like that. So it was a great big hall. The kids painted furniture, and the boys that were in shop knew how to do a little carpentry, and they put some things together and built a counter for a snack bar and where the director could work. And we had stools for the snack bar. We had 2 pool tables, 2 ping pong tables, and we learned to dance up there. We had a jukebox. We had a reading nook where people donated sofas and books and magazines for the canteen. And our director was Mrs. Langworthy, and her husband would help her. He worked at the bomber plant, but when he was not working, like for our dances at night, we'd have dances after the ball games, and it was just great time. I think that's something we need today, and I'm sure the kids would never go for it. It would be too structured for them, but we loved we called it the TAC for the teenage canteen. I mentioned some of the things that were rationed. Besides shoes and gas, butter was rationed, as was meat and coffee. I didn't drink coffee, and I guess cigarettes were rationed. I don't know if they were rationed or just hard to get.
Both.
Oils, cooking oils and things like that were rationed. Metals were hard to get. It was all going to the war effort, as was rubber. Tires, I guess if your tires ran out on your car, wore out on your car, a lot of cars ended up on blocks during the war. And a lot of the metals were used. We saved tin cans, for one thing.
Right.
And I was trying to think, it seems like aluminum foil has always been around, but I don't know if we had tin foil. We had tin foil like in gum and things like that, where you'd peel the paper off of the tin foil and save just the foil, and you'd donate that. We had raid collection days. One thing we had that we saved were the tin cans, excuse me, rubber and the grease and metals. Somewhere in there, margarine came in, and when it first came in, it had a little packet of orange powder that you had to work into this block of white margarine, and you'd work it almost like either with your hands or with a meat something to mash it.
Mortar and pestle.
Mortar and pestle, yes. And then you might even try to shape it nice like you did if you had a butter press. Shape it like that.
I understand that was due to the dairy interest.
Is that what it was? I didn't really know what caused
I think
it.
I read that in Reader's Digest.
That's interesting.
They objected. It was competition for
Oh,
butter.
it's why we had to do it and mash it ourselves. Oh, all right. Some of the things that I did and other girls and certainly the women of the town did to help and volunteer for the war effort was at the Red Cross. Our Girl Scouts and then individuals too would knit squares to make Afghans or lap robes for the boys in the hospitals. we would knit socks. If we were able to knit that well, we could knit socks for them, and they would give you the yarn. You just take it home. When you finished your shot socks, you take them back. And some of mine, not sure they could wear, but the effort was there.
So you learned how to knit socks.
Well, I learned on squares,
Right.
and then we did the squares first, and then I learned to do socks. There was one lady who came to the movie really often. The movie was a big part of our life, and she had one seat that she always sat in, but throughout the movie and everything, she would continue knitting. She was very active in the Red Cross.
That
Miss
is
Correll,
skilled.
that was very skilled, and she just amazed us all. I thought that was wonderful. We rolled bandages at the Red Cross. You'd go to the Red Cross building and roll bandages, and my memories of, these are not gauze, these are from sheets and other items like that they would cut up, and they could use them later after they were sanitized and used for bandages. Did a lot of that. My mother, along with many of the other ladies, were active in the canteen for the guys to provide entertainment for the soldiers. And I said I didn't know that Dobbins had come in, but it was there during the war, because Dobbins Air Force Base is what I'm talking about. I know it was named for a young man that was killed in the early part of the war, but that's what the USO was for. We did have it in Marietta, and the ladies, I can remember the parties and the guys coming in. It probably was in, I was too young to actually dance with them and entertain them, but we might go down and serve punch and that kind of thing. One thing I remember to do with Bell Bomber, even during the war, they had parts of the plane that they would sell, excess stuff that they couldn't use or something. Maybe this is after the war, but what we particularly liked were the nose cone-like things. They were plastic, early plastic, some sort of material, but they made wonderful punch bowls for big crowds. And then also they sold, this may have been after the war, and I'm sorry, but they sold the cots that were in the B-29s. They had cots. They were attached on one side, so it only had legs on one side. They were attached to the body of the plane on the other. Some of my memories, I've already talked about the Pearl Harbor Day. That was really important time and very touching to us. And then all the boys going off to war. As I got older in high school, the boys who were seniors, many of them volunteered immediately. Others went into college where they had the V-12 and those programs. But then others were drafted too, because the boys started needing them younger and younger. And so by the time I was a junior, the guy I dated was a senior, and he went off. He did not have to go overseas, I think, because it was so late in the war maybe, but he was in places I'd never heard of, like Harlingen, Texas, and things like that. I know now where Harlingen, Texas is. But that hurt. You know, you get really attached to these fellows in your junior and senior years. And, with mine, it was just one. One thing we had, back to recreation, we had ball teams that would come in. This is like some baseball, some softball. The baseball teams had players who were too old to go in the Army, but they would be working maybe in Conley General Depot. They had a team, and I can remember them coming up, and I don't remember the fellow's name, but he was a real popular baseball player who was older than for the war, but he was, I don't know, maybe if he was at Conley, he was in the war. They wore their baseball uniforms. I don't know if he was in the war. But it was all big news that he would come to play. The blackouts, we would have drills. My uncle was air raid warden. He had the helmet, which we later found when we sold his house, and the other insignia and whatever he needed. But for blackouts, it was just drills. And we would put blankets over our windows in one room. Usually it was our living room, but we had French doors going into the hall, so we'd have to block out those French doors as well as the glass in the front door and the two windows. If we really could not then go out of the living room because we had a big window up at the top of the steps that we couldn't black out. So we all stayed in the living room while it was blacked out. It was always drill, thank goodness. It was never real. a little bit more real was trying to go on vacation, and we had gone traditionally to Daytona Beach every summer. And the first time we went, it was not very glamorous. We went to Jacksonville Beach then. This was not during the war, but we sort of looked like the Joad family. We had piles of stuff piled in the back seat of the car, and car was old and it sort of limped along. And down in South Georgia, thankfully, when you stopped to get gas, they would bring trays with a pitcher of ice water and glasses for each person in the car, which I thought was wonderful. It was marvelous. But we stayed in sort of a little tourist camp. This was maybe 39, something like that. I just remember it raining, and at the tourist camp, I wanted water that wasn't sulfur water, and I didn't know to call it sulfur water. And Mother said, well, just go up to the desk and ask the man for some good water. So I did, and he said, good water? Young lady, that's fine water coming out of that tap. That's good water right there. And I wanted to say, I want water that doesn't smell bad. Then later, we did go to Daytona several years, and then during the war, Mother took us on a train to Jacksonville Beach. And my girlhood friend went with me, and we had Pullmans. It was an overnight to Jacksonville. My friend was in the one with me. And since it was night, we didn't raise our curtain until we got to Macon, I believe. And there were even troop trains down there. But in Jacksonville, when we came into Jacksonville for a 15-year-old, it was sort of heaven. Here were all these sailors. I mean, sailors everywhere. Well, we had to wait for our bus then to get to the beach. And the beach was blacked out. Once we got out there, of course, we got a place to live. And you always went to the boardwalk where all the activity was. But they had blacked it out. They had big doors closing it from the seaside so that you couldn't get out to the boardwalk without going through a back door, which had some sort of construction where you came out. When you came out of the door, you didn't go out immediately into the evening, even though it was the back side. They had maybe a black curtain, and then there was an angle so that the rays wouldn't come out the back door. So the rides were not running, but you could go inside and play the games that you played, like skee ball and those things. There were, and we know about this from papers and magazines. Life magazine was wonderful. It kept us abreast of what was going on in the war. And in movies, after the movie, we'd have newsreels. And some of my most important memories, I guess, are of just scores of prisoners of war being marched into prisoner of war camps, and dog fights with the fighters fighting in the air. I see now movies of some of the war years like that, and I think, oh yeah, that was just like that newsreel. We saw it all the time. The Jacksonville thing was just a real excursion for us because we didn't really know a lot about what was going on really out of town. We knew from radio and those things, but we did not know, say, that there were 10,000 sailors in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm sure that was a haven as well as Washington must have been for a lot of lonely ladies. My life really was not affected too much except for not being able to drive everywhere we wanted to go. And the little bit of rationing, the boys that went that we knew. My next door neighbor had 2 sons in the war, Bob and Jim Dawson. Jim was in the South Pacific, and Bob was in D-Day landing. He was a paratrooper, and he was killed. And that was one of the saddest things because I saw the messenger boy. It was not a chaplain or somebody from the military. As a messenger boy came. I saw him lay his bicycle down and go up to Miss Dawson, and I just got chills. And then I just heard her scream.
Western Union, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was Western Union. And that was just one of the saddest things to me. Because he was young. He probably was 19 or 20. And just real young. We were fortunate. We didn't have people in our family, but just the neighbors and the boys that went off to school. And there were not many of them that I knew. I didn't even know many of the people that were graduating the year I came in to school. We had different classes.
I remember you think about the coast, New Jersey, Florida. The folks who lived there during the war, they would report anecdotes of German soldiers coming up from the subs.
Yes, isn't that scary?
Did you hear anything about
Yes,
those?
I knew about the subs. And I believe it was in New Jersey where they actually came ashore And they knew
Can
about
you
them and
talk?
were arrested. And they were also off of Florida, both Daytona and Jacksonville, and then further down they were cited.
That many.
Isn't that something? And then over in the Gulf, there are still remnants of, and maybe it's from the Civil War, but there is, and I think also along the East Coast, they had some remnants of like fortifications where you could look out to see if there was anything approaching from out there. But
We're lucky they didn't have aircraft carriers, aren't we?
aren't we though? Ooh. Along that line.
I didn't realize they actually made some captures. And couldn't
Yeah,
tell
this
how much
was
there was rumors
up
of-
in North Carolina. I'm sorry, up in New Jersey.
Yeah.
I believe that they actually came ashore, and it seems to me like maybe there were 5 or 6 of them.
They
And-
wanted to go shopping.
yeah, let's go downtown and shop. Oh, Saks would be good. Whatever. Let's see what I can think about.
Do you want to mention your Hawaiian pen
Oh
pal?
yes, in 4th grade, my teacher had us correspond with a group of 4th graders in Wapahu, Hawaii. And my friend's name was Yukiko Kakuchi. I just thought that was so intriguing. And we kept writing to each other for a number of years. So when Pearl Harbor was bombed, I did not know anything about the geography. I just knew that Wapahu was near Honolulu, and I was very concerned about Yukiko.
That sounds Japanese.
It is Japanese. One of the things that she wrote about was her schooling, that she would go to school all during the week. On Saturday, she would go to Japanese school, and then on Sunday, they'd go to Sunday school. And should I read these letters?
Why not?
Okay, I have 2 letters from her. I think it's really interesting, the logo of the Hawaiian Islands
Lovely.
there.
She was maybe 10 or 12.
Probably about 12 now, I mean, when these were written. And then on the back, it was plain, there was nothing. This was a letter in November of 41, before Pearl Harbor. This one came in, I believe, February of 42.
I would pick the 42. And
Yeah, okay, and then it's been censored on the back. And released by ICB number 143.
I didn't know she was 12 years old, I guess.
Let's see. Dear Sally, I first want to thank you for the beautiful necklace. I enjoyed wearing it. Apparently I'd sent it for Christmas. I'm very fine, thank you, and so is the family. I have 2 brothers and 1 sister over 18. You're telling me what fun you're having playing with snow, making me jealous, huh? But I understand you. You don't mean to make me jealous, but you want to tell me the news over there. And then she writes, remember Pearl Harbor.
Oh, my.
Of what happened on December the 7th, school was closed the next day. It was opened again on January the 2nd. Now, because we're going by wartime, school starts at 8:30 and closes at 2. And I don't think we'll have to go to school on summer vacation. We don't have school on Saturdays. I got a mask and was fingerprinted. Blackout every night, and I'm not having much fun. But if I don't obey the law, you know where that'll lead me. Hawaii didn't have enough trees this year, Christmas trees she means, but we enjoyed a Merry Christmas just the same, and I hope you had a Merry Christmas too. Wapahu is 15 miles away from Honolulu. Your pal, Yukito Kakuchi. Remember Pearl Harbor. You remember the song, Remember Pearl
What
Harbor?
was her citizenship? That was.
Oh no, she was a U.S. citizen. Her
US
family,
citizen.
she was. I think even her family were both born in the islands. But that was something we carried on all during the high school, and I guess it must have been in college when we stopped writing each other. But that was a fun thing to do. Something that was really lots of fun and joyous was the day the war ended. My dad was out of town, and by then I am 16, so I was the one who would be closing up and checking out the money and everything from the swimming pool receipts.
4 long years.
Yes, for all my high school years were in the war. And President Roosevelt, I should mention this before we talk about the end of the war. President Roosevelt was my hero. I just thought he was for 3 terms. He was the only president I ever knew, really, as a youngster. One thing they did during the war and before the war, polio, or what we call infantile paralysis, was very prevalent in those days. We would not be able, we couldn't leave our yard if there was a polio epidemic. We had to stay in our own yard. I can remember as a younger child throwing jacks and playing jackstones alone and playing with my dollhouse all by myself with no friends because you couldn't visit. Certainly the swimming pool's closed. You couldn't go swimming. And but then later, one thing during those years, they would have a ball or a dance on President Roosevelt's birthday, January the 30th or somewhere in that vicinity. And that was always lots of fun. It was a fundraiser to raise money to fight polio. Jonas Salk, had never heard of, you know.
Yeah.
And so it was and of course with his coming to Warm Springs, it made it more personal to us. He was just our hero. And I do remember those dances. Might have been too young. Well, later on I was old enough to dance and enjoy them. One another thing, my brother and I liked to jitterbug. And jitterbug was the dance. And of course with my dad being responsible for that building, we didn't have to pay to go to any of the public dances or anything they had there. And they would have dancing contests. And we'd always win the jitterbug contest. But the prize was you got in free at the next one. Well, we got in free anyway. But that was interesting to me that President Roosevelt was. And then of course came home one day from school, and the neighbor said, "Sally, did you hear about the president?" I hadn't. They didn't have announcements made in school over an intercom back then. And I said, "What about the president? He died." And that was just something that couldn't happen, actually. I just didn't think that could ever happen. And it was so sad. I have this picture that was published in Life magazine of Graham Jackson playing his accordion when the train left and tears streaming down his face. I get chills.
That's a powerful photograph. I saw
Isn't it though? Absolutely. Yes. Oh, and another one I'm sure you remember as well as I was at the end of the war with all the celebration going on at Times Square and the sailor grabbing the unknown nurse, bending her backwards and giving her that big hug and kiss. In Marietta, Daddy was away that day and I was in charge, a 16-year-old in charge. But that just meant I locked up everything and put the money in the safe and that. But it was about, I don't know, 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon maybe. And we got word, a friend of mine came running over from her house, which was, there were a number of houses built to move people into quickly during World War II in Marietta. And she came running over and said, "Sally, the war's over, turn on the radio." And I didn't have a radio. And she said, "Well, come over to my house." Well, I couldn't leave. I had to get people out of the pool. So I went out, I called somebody, and they verified it. And I went out and announced that everybody had to get out of the pool, that we were closing, because I wasn't in on the celebration. And we finally got the pool closed, and everything locked up. It's a wonder we made it to get it all secured because I was so eager to get away. But my friend and I and some other friends that had come by her house walked up to the square. We went down to Whitlock Avenue, which is really congested now, but it was a lovely residential street then. We walked up to the square, and it was like New Year's celebration in Times Square or wherever. People were going around the square and around and around. It was full of cars, and people were singing. They were doing conga lines. If you don't know, conga is a dance. It was very popular during the war. And long conga lines, you'd be dancing with your hands on somebody's hips, and you're doing 1, 2, 3, kick. All around the square, and it would be long ones, and then people were still driving with all of us, and they fortunately were going one way. I think at that time the square was two directions. But we got into a convertible with Chick and Cotton Hill. Now Chick and Cotton Hill were brothers of Virginia Hill, who was a mall, quote, and I use that loosely, but a girlfriend that lived with one of them, Bugsy Siegel, who was a well-known gangster during the early days of Vegas. He was responsible for getting a lot going in Vegas. So it was fun to ride around in that convertible, sitting up on that convertible after we'd been dancing around the square. And it just seems like the celebration went on forever and ever, ever. and it was just wonderful. But then we did decide, we really ought to go to church. And I grew up Southern Baptist, and they did leave the churches open that night, and we all went to church and said our prayers, and then went back and celebrated some more. But it was a wonderful, despite the war as a teenager, it was a wonderful time to grow up. It was certainly sad for all the losses. We were so fortunate that we were never bombed, that it was kept abroad. I'm sure that President Truman had the most horrendous decision of anybody to ever make. But before that, I remember Jimmy Doolittle's raid and how important they were. There was a picture about that later, about bombing Tokyo. And we had a lot of propaganda movies. That's something that ought to be mentioned. The movies were out. You didn't recognize them as propaganda, but they would have a lot of good things in there about loyalty to the country, and how everybody, the guys would all be rushing out to sign up. Everybody was so patriotic. Mothers, families hung flags in the window to indicate that they had a son. And there were different colors if these little flags were about this high. And every mother every family who had a son in the service would hang one in their window. Some of them had 2 or 3. And if a son was killed, if a person was killed, then it was a gold flags, it was different color. But I have not seen any of those. I guess they're in museums. One thing I've enjoyed so much, if you haven't seen the D-Day Museum in New Orleans, it's fantastic. It's absolutely wonderful. I could spend 3 days in it, and this will probably be part of that someday. But I really encourage everybody to go down there, and I encourage everybody to come here and partake. You veterans out there, partake of this one. We need to know what you went through over there. I just think it's so, so important.
And
that's
so
about
far,
all.
every veteran story has been a different one.
Oh, I bet it's been
Every
interesting.
experience has been different. I guess that'll always be the facts.
Oh, I guess it is. I just can't imagine what they must have gone through. The ones in Europe had the cold and those things, and then the fellas in the jungles and the rocky atolls in the Pacific. There was a different way of fighting over there, but it was just as awful, just as terrible.
Did you have any military pen pals, like V-mails?
Oh, I did. I did not bring one. One of them was a boy that had graduated. He was the first Eagle Scout in Marietta. Kemp Mabry was his name, and he was a fine young man.
2 or 3 streets named Mabry.
I don't doubt that. He went on to be a dean or something down at Statesboro at the Georgia College down there. But he and I were pen pals, and I do still have an email from him. I wish I had brought it. I'm sure by now you've heard about email. I'm sorry, that's the modern version. V-mail, Victory Mail. These were mail letters that they gave you the forms to write on, and they were just maybe this big and this high. And then they would photograph them and shrink them in size. They didn't go in the form that we received them in. They were done picture-wise, and maybe just on a film. And then, so they went to Europe, and then they were blown up over there, I guess, when they were censored, and then so that the guys could read them. And their replies came back. Everything was censored. Everything was censored. And I've gotten some letters that I don't have now, where they were either cut out or blacked out. Like this time of the year in France, and they black out France because they didn't want us to know where he was.
Oh.
Yeah. But the finished product would come out, again, this size, square. And it would say V-mail on it, and of course it was free for the soldiers. All the soldiers got, all the military men got free postage, which I think was only fair.
Yeah.
So different from now. If you look at old movies, you'll see cigarettes being stuck in the mouth of every wounded soldier, it seemed like. USO handed out cigarettes like mad. All the cigarette companies furnished the cigarettes, of course. And smoking was just looked at entirely. We didn't know that it would kill you back then. And it's so different now. But I would have had a hard time. I love Coca-Cola. I'm a true Georgian. And if they didn't have Coca-Cola over there, I do think they got some to the troops, though.
Oh, yes. Coca-Cola. I don't know how many.
We were speaking about, and maybe this is a man you've had on, I belong to Life Enrichment Services, which is a senior organization in Decatur. And we have different programs where you can take maybe 4 courses in a Thursday, which happens to be our day to meet. And several times they've had courses where the men came to speak, veterans came to speak and tell their experiences.
Didn't know that.
And because the man who was heading it up was in the 8th Air Force and was a pilot of a P-38. We had a lot of pilots, excuse me, or men who were on airplanes. And there was this one man who was a tail gunner flying out with the 8th Air Force out of England, going across the channel. And I don't know how close they were then to France or wherever they were headed in, but they had left England. And he's the tail gunner. He's sort of back there by himself, and flying a B-17. And he realizes that he's sailing along, but it doesn't seem as noisy as usual. And he tries to radio up front, and he's not getting any reply. The plane had been hit. They were under fire, so he knew that they were being attacked. But he didn't realize the plane had actually been hit. I guess he didn't even feel vibrations. But he was detached from the plane, and he was just gliding through the air until he landed. But he was rescued, and I thought how wonderful to live to tell that story. We had some more at Oak Grove Methodist Church. The senior group had a group of their own members talk and tell about some of their experiences. And you see these gentlemen, and they're such nice, sweet, mannerly gentlemen, and they went through horrendous things. And to hear what they did is unbelievable. Ray Moore, who was commentator on WSB or one of the local stations, was also responsible for getting those together and getting them volunteer to talk to us. So there's a wealth of information out there if we could just get it.
How did the tail gunner manage to get down?
Well, I don't know. He came down in the water, but he was rescued. So Navy must have been out there. As I said, it was not too far from the French or coast. But those tales were interesting, and that has not been more than 4 or 5 years ago we heard them.
Did you marry a serviceman?
I did, but I went to college, and I didn't get out of college until 50. That was another fun experience. I went to college in 46 to Georgia, Go Dogs, and the boys by then were being discharged and coming back. And so there were lots and lots of them. Gasoline still wasn't plentiful, but it was more than it was. And I remember one group of boys, I was on coordinate campus where they put the freshman and sophomore girls. I guess they didn't trust us to be down on the main campus, but we had our own cafeteria and everything, but we had the best food on campus. And the boys would come out to eat, and every Thursday night we had steak. And even growing up, I'd never had a T-bone steak. We always had cube steak. But those boys found out about it. There was one group of them that were in I think it was not a T model, it was a little bit later, but the top had been cut off. It was not really a convertible. And they must have packed 10 kids, 10 boys in that to come out and eat at coordinate campus. But there were a lot of veterans. And to your answer, yes, I did marry a veteran. I married in 53, but he had been a B-24 pilot, and he was stationed in Italy and North Africa. And I don't know much about his experiences except that he told me that at one time they were under attack, and this was in a B-24 Liberator. He was the pilot. And this must have been a horrendous one, but his pilot was shot, and his face was just torn up. But Miss Smitty was able to bring the plane on in. He did not talk about it much, but he had a lot of leftover things that bothered him. He drank a lot, and he would talk and talk mainly about the people that he knew, not so much about battles, but talk about when they were not out in a combat zone and talk about things like that. But in his sleep, he would just mutter and struggle and hit, not me, but hit the bed and things like that. And I think he was tormented, and then later he was called up. He was in a National Guard unit in California in tanks, and he was called up as a tank commander to go to Korea. And so to have both, and he's not alone. There were a lot of the guys that served in World War II who also were called up for Korea. And they certainly did double time. But
That's too much.
he was a good dad to his kids, and it was fine. But they did go through an awful lot. I feel so sorry for the mothers the parents and sisters and brothers of the boys that were wounded and lost. You know, Lawson General Hospital out here was a big receiving point for a lot of the wounded after they got back to the States, I guess, and passed through, and maybe they decided, I don't remember much about that. I did go to work for the Veterans Administration in '66, and a good number of the people had worked at Lawson when the boys were coming back from overseas. But I wish I knew more about that.
What kind of work did you do at the VA?
I was a personnel management specialist. I started out as a clerk, but I had my degree, and I just sort of got in on the ground floor, and then through merit promotion, I became a personnel management specialist and did labor relations, employee relations, hiring, taking adverse action, and then later doing union contracts and equal employment opportunity things when that got to be big. And classifying positions to set, you would look at, when you do a desk audit or a job audit and go to the point and see what people were doing, and then classify their job according to standards that you had published. And you might have to look at 2 or 3 different standards if it was a mixed duty type job. So in essence, I set people's salary, but their supervisors determined what duties were assigned to them. A lot of the nurses at VA had been nurses during the war. Their service was not credited toward their federal service, which was such a, it was not equal at all.
Injustice.
I think now they are being given credit for that service. And there were some areas that, for the men, that were not credited. I think maybe, I can't specify what that was, but I remember I had one hydrologist who had some service relative to the war, and he was still trying to get credit for the war he had to count toward his federal retirement. But it was the nurses I really felt for, because we all know, at least from movies and newsreels, what those nurses went through.
Yeah.
I don't know what else I can add. I know mine has been
It's
so...
quite a skilled job to know all of that.
Well, it was almost too much for me. Somebody said, "Don't you miss it? Don't you want to be back at work?" The only thing I miss is the people. I do miss the people. You knew a lot of people by name only, but you also knew many people from some of them had big problems, and some of them were coming in to be brought on board, and you go out recruiting them and that type of thing. And it was very interesting. Very,
How
very
long
interesting.
were you there?
I had 22 years of service. I didn't go to work for VA until my kids were in school, and I think I went to work in '66 and then retired in '89 when I was, the day I hit 60, the end of the month of the day I hit 60.
And you didn't miss it.
No, I miss the people.
Yeah.
I miss the people. And, but I got busy, and I wanted to be, this is not important, I wanted to be a step-on tour guide. And a lady, I was volunteering here at the History Center, and we had some sort of function where some of the people who worked in the tour industry were there. And she gave me her card and told me to come down and talk to her. So I did, and I took training immediately after I left VA. The next week I went down and started training. It was a week's training, and we ordered our uniforms. They would furnish the uniforms, but we had to buy our shoes and purses to match. And so I bought my shoes and purses. And they said, I went on a couple of sample tours with other guides. Loved it, just loved it. But then I didn't hear from them. Did not hear from them. And I thought, well, I just sort of knew that's the way it would be. And so by July, I was with the History Center for Stay and See Georgia, down at Underground. And the gentleman from the Georgia Film Commission sat next to me when I went to have lunch out on the porch in one of the Brumby Rockers. And, oh, that's so ugly. But
Brumby's Marietta.
Marietta, they were right back of our house, and I'll come back to that. But we were talking, and I was telling him about this experience. And he said, I bet you thought it was you, didn't you? And I said, I really did. And he said, no, they went bankrupt. Well, by then, I had been staying home and doing fun things, and I didn't really want to go back to work. I was making it financially. So, but speaking of Brumby Chair Factory, in Marietta, at the time of the war, Brumby Chair Factory was very well known throughout the country for its Brumby rockers, and still is. But there was a great big factory right back of our house, That was one of the main industries in Marietta before Bell Bomber. And then out the street was the knitting mill, hole-proof knitting mill, hosiery mill. And at the end of the war, but all during my growing up years, the hosiery company would blow a whistle when it was time for their people to go to work, and so would Brumby Chair. There might just be 15 minutes difference in the two whistles. So living right there pretty close to both of them, we heard they'd blow a noonday whistle and then they'd blow a quitting time whistle. And people walked a lot even before the war because it was depression before the war. So we'd see lots of people going to and from these jobs. But that was one way we knew when the war was over, because all the sirens sounded, the factory whistles blew all over town, and they continued to blow and blow and blow. And that was one of the announcements at the end of the war that really told us the war was over. And this was Pacific. VE Day, I don't remember too much celebration. I remember going to church and remember very little about it.
That's right, because we were still fighting Japan.
We were still fighting, yes. And we still had a long way to go in Japan. But those, that's something else I touched on. But when the bomber plant was built, they needed housing for these workers to come in. And one of the first things they did was build Marietta Place, which was just one-level apartments. And they were down on Fairground Street, just at the foot of the hill from where the bomber plant was. People could almost walk up that hill. Some of them are still left, but not many. Pine Forest Homes was another apartment complex that was at the corner of Roswell Road and Fairground Street. Roswell Road and the 4-lane highway. But also we had a lot of wood frame houses that went up real fast, that were duplexes, and some single unit homes that were put up really fast, and to accommodate these newcomers, because there was such an influx of people. People rented rooms who never would have thought about renting rooms to men. The boarding houses opened. Even in the Kennesaw House, there was not a boarding house as such, but there was, I think it was a tea room, so they probably didn't serve to the men, but to the wives. But we did have the Dixie Cafe and the Marietta Cafe on the square, and they'd been there for quite a while and did well during the war, I'm sure. But town boomed, it grew outward, where the 4-lane crosses, where 41 crosses Roswell Street now. At that time, the Leo Frank case was still very much in the minds of Marietta people. And it was just beyond that intersection out Roswell Street where Leo Frank was hung. And that was something, we'd heard about all our lives. It was such a tragedy. But now it's so built up. I mean, town is way out from there. But
time may be catching up.
Well, I appreciate again you letting me come. I don't really think my tales are interesting
they are.
Compared to what the fellas could tell, but I'm trying to find you something.
You can kind of wind it up. I think you were very much a participant.
Thank you so much.
With all of those events that took place.
Well, they were everyday living in those days.
You were generous to come and tell us about it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I think you've been enjoying your retirement somewhat, haven't you?
Yes, indeed. I've gotten to travel and to an extent I did never think I would.
Yeah, you mentioned a daughter. Do you have other children?
Oh, yes, I have 2 daughters. One is here, and her daughter just graduated as valedictorian last night at Brookwood High, and her mama had been valedictorian at Cross Keys. So I'm very proud of those. I have 2 grandchildren, 2 granddaughters here. That granddaughter that graduated, and then a 13-year-old whose team won city tennis tournament this year. And then in Arkansas, I have a daughter who's married to an Air Force fellow, and he's going to retire within a year. She's principal of a high school, and she has a 23-year-old girl who's on her own and working as an insurance agent. And then she has a 13-year-old boy. I do have one grandson, and he's just such an athlete. My dad, the recreation director, I hope is looking down from heaven, because this boy's good in all kinds of sports. But again, thank you for asking me, and I think the History Center's doing a beautiful job.
I agree they are.
Thank
You still got it, Clay. I hadn't got the right button yet. Still on.
Let's see, Margaret. I'm an electronic idiot.
No. Better go call Francis.